divine rise. Blessed be to your day. May it be everything you require to create everything that you desire. It's time to change that conversation with yourself. It's time to change the conversation with yourself. The conversation that you've been having. Every conversation that you have and the comprehension of the conversations that we have with ourselves, they follow two simple monologues. You can simplify it. It's not really complex. A lot of times we put ourselves into situations and we try to make them more complex than they actually are. And the complexity is simply the emotional aspects and everything that get into that space. But we're going to build in that. I want you to ask yourself a question, and it's going to change the way that you have that conversation with yourself, how you build with yourself. I had to learn the difference between hoping and coping. I had to learn the difference between hoping and coping and affirming and learning. Hoping and coping versus affirming and learning. The difference between gratitude in the higher aptitudes and versus the fear of my flight, the fear of me taking off, the fear of what will happen when I take off and what would I land on. And that gave me into the aspects of hoping and coping. When you're hoping and coping, it will feel like a constant state of reacting and resistance. Reacting and resistance, or resistance and reacting. I remember for myself in being so hard on myself in that space of my mindset, to where when I would set up a plan or I would set up a goal or I would set something up for my, set up works or put myself into a position, it was based in hoping and coping. That means I would hope for the best and then I would cope with the worst, whatever came up. My conversation would always sound like, hey, I got the plan to drop my podcast episode, and this unforeseen aptitude based on what I was looking at in my external, I was like, I can drop a podcast episode and I hope that I get some views. And then I'm going to cope if I don't get the views because I didn't set the tone for the views. Versus me affirming and learning. That means learning the terrain, learning my emotional aspects, learning how I deliver myself, learning my delivery system, being in gratitude when I start my process, and being in the constant stream of wanting to learn how to be better. One example of this for me, and I'm excited, always excited, you're always excited and in gratitude, is that now my podcast is at $1 a play. That means for every episode of my podcast, for every play of my podcast, I get paid $1. That's exciting for me. I took away the expectancy of, I'm looking at a Drink Champs podcast. I'm looking at an established podcast on a platform that has a backing behind it, versus me being an independent podcaster in everything that I'm building. So now I can affirm and learn. Through affirming and learning, there's no resistance. You're always going to embrace that lesson. The beginning episodes of my podcast, the music was not my music. It was I went to freedownloads.com, or I went and found free music, and I didn't know I couldn't lengthen it. Music be like 6 minutes, probably 7 minutes. So it'd be the beginning of the episode and it wouldn't play out through the episode. So the feel wasn't there. That didn't stop me. It brought up a lot of doubt. It brought up a lot of my doubts. And this is what happens when you're going into that new space with yourself. It's going to bring up the things that need to be cleared out. It brought up a lot of doubts in my mind. It brought up a lot of insecurities. It brought up a lot of my fear and abandonment wounds. It brought up a lot of wounds in me building my podcast. Up until now, when I do a podcast, it's pretty much copy and paste. I know between my Saturdays and Sunday, I'm working on music. Between Saturday and Sunday, I'm working on music. By the time I'm done with the final scores of the music, I have an idea set, or I'm able to visualize the idea or what I'm going to be speaking on, what topic I'm going to be discussing, how I'm going to put the topic together. I'm in that space, and that's how I'm embracing that flow. I'm affirming and learning. I'm not hoping and coping. When you're stuck in this space of hoping and coping, your conversation is a lot different to yourself. When I was stuck in hoping and coping, it was something as simple as when I go to my job and when I would go to work, I would hope that people would sit there and do the stuff that they needed to do. So when I came in, then I would be able to do what I needed to do. It was almost never that case. Unless I was there that night, the night before, learning, directing, putting things into certain places, for me to come in, when I came in that daytime, it wouldn't be the way that I set the course. But that was based on hoping and coping, so I would cope with it. So now, since I'm coping, or I was coping, my emotions, I'll be angry. I was already angry at something. I was already upset with something. Before I went into the space, I was only coping with the physical manifestation that was meant to trigger me in that space. So I'm angry. Why am I angry? Man, because they didn't do this, this, and this. Knowing that for the last 6 months, they ain't been doing that shit at all. So the next step for me was I could either hope that they get it, or I could voice, so y'all were here last night. Nobody did this, and this, and this, and this of this sort, and bring that out there into the space. And then the managers or whoever was in charge that night be like, they got busy and this, and this. They would give me a line of excuses. And then I found myself going back and forth but I was here on the other night when we didn't have nobody online, and I still made sure everything was done right. They were like, yeah, but everybody's not like you. And then I kept skipping over the lesson. The lesson was nobody was like you. You cannot put expectancy in others to be like you. You can't put your definition of you on to others. You only can accept what others do and then adjust your response. Adjusting your response. A lot of times we fail with that aspect because we're in a constant state of resistance with ourselves. We're already in resistance with ourselves. We're already in a state of reaction with ourselves. So naturally, when our environment matches that, we just think it's normal. We never go into the challenging aspect of it because we're not taking that time for the beginning aspects of ourselves to set the tone. I wasn't setting the tone. So now when I set the tone, when I started going to work, and I would be at the restaurant, and I'd be in there, I would go in. Let's say I worked the night before. Before I would leave, I would state, and this is learning how to communicate in an open manner, in an unbiased manner, learning how to question, learning how to ask those questions, learning how to remove the excuses. Only you can remove the excuses out of your life. So it was based on the questions I would ask. So the day before I would leave, I would actually ask the cook, the lead cook, or whoever was there. I would ask the manager. I was like, yo, so what would you like me to do in order to aid you in us making this shit flow right? And they would give me, and then some would give me the answer. Others would give me more excuses. Some would be like, man, it'd be tiring and all this good stuff. And then other ones would be like, man, but it would be easier if you were here. I'd be like, but I'm not. You have to accept that I'm not here. Like, I'm doing other things. And that basically was the narrative, another lesson for me to learn. I was like, oh, this is what's happening because I'm not here. As I'm building and learning the new aptitudes of myself, the space is automatically going to constrict and change to fit me not going back into that space. As you're growing, as you're cultivating yourself, as you're coming into your new self, it's just like if you go to the gym and you working out and you lose a couple pounds in your waist and the pants don't fit anymore. And your pants don't fit anymore. You got to go buy new pants. You have to learn the new aptitude. You've been doing this work for a reason. You've been doing your work for a reason. Everything that you're doing, you're going from hoping and coping, hoping that it works, coping if it doesn't, to affirming and learning. Being in constant gratitude, being grateful in gratitude for the lesson that you're about to learn. Every single time you go into a space. Now when I'm inside of a space, instead of me looking at it based on hoping and coping or expectancy and reverence inside of myself, this expectancy and reverence inside of myself, now I'm looking at it like, what can I learn about this space? How does this space reflect me? Is it really me or is it them? What questions am I not asking? Am I refraining from asking myself certain questions because I don't want certain answers? Or am I really putting myself in a position to actually learn something? Am I really being open? Am I really being honest? Am I really putting my truth forward? What is my truth? These are the questions that you will ask yourself. These are the questions that, when that overwhelming feeling comes up, these are the questions that are better for you to ask as you're setting your affirmations. It's easy for me now, but 5 years ago, about 5, 6 years ago, this was like distraction city. I talked about that yesterday. It was distraction city for me last year, for like 5 years ago. That means every time that I set up, I was like, yo, I'm going to get up and meditate. I'm going to get up and set my affirmations. I'm going to get up and do this, and this. And then I had this expectancy. I didn't deal with the expectancy quotient, quotient of that expectancy in my mind. So like after I would say it after a couple of days and nothing really happened, or I didn't see what was happening, or I didn't see, or I was not able to see the lessons that were coming up in the space for me to start learning through my affirmations, I would cut it off. I would stop doing it. If I didn't get what I wanted, I would stop what I was doing. I was like, no, I'm not doing it no more. I'm not getting what I want, therefore it doesn't work. What does that sound like? That sounds like your inner child sitting there with their arms crossed. A lot of the times, your imagination, your inner child, that is your architect. That is your designer. That is the architect. That is the designer of your space. Your inner child, and the aspects of your inner child, those emotional channels, that's the architect of your space. That's the architect. So if you're not in tune with your inner child, and you're saying, I want to get this done, I want to visualize this, I want to see this, I want to paint this picture, but you're not in tune with your inner child or with the emotional aspects of your inner child, everything that's going to be drawn, everything that's going to be birthed into that space is going to be based on how your inner child was created, how you created your inner child. This goes into the aspects of everything that you're going to come into and you're affirming, you're manifesting, you're bringing into your space. It has 4 parts. It has 2 parts that are using it to connect it. Either your inner child is based on and creating from the wounded aspects of the wounded feminine aspect within inside of self and the wounded masculine within inside of self. So think about the emotional wounds based in the feminine aspects, the mother wounds, and these wounds of that nature. And then think about the wounds of the father, the fraternal wounds. Those are what get your energy every time that you embrace it. So if you have mother wounds, the father wounds, these parenting wounds that you haven't dealt with, these parenting wounds that you haven't dealt with, then if I sit here and say something as simple as, I affirm I'll use an example. I affirm to start a YouTube channel. Use that as an example. I want to start a YouTube channel. I want to start a business. I want to start eating right. I want to start something. Whatever you wanting to start. Whatever you're trying to tap into. You got to remember the your intention is powered by that wound. So if I have the mother wounds of my mother always telling me you're an accident, and I have my father wounds or the fraternal wounds of what raised me, and they're telling me that I'm a cancer and all of these things, then everything that I'm going to create is going to be an antagonist or being protagonist to those aspects. That means if I say I want to start a business, it's going to be to prove that I'm not an accident. In order for me to start that company or start that flow or come into that aspect, I got to prove that I'm not a cancer. So now my inner child, using a visualization, my inner child has their book in front of them, the storybook that they're reading. And the storybook that they're reading is the story of the beginning aspects of my life. How I wrote that story out. What I accepted in that story. So now everything in that story is based on hoping and coping. Until I address this story, until I learn my path inside of this story, until I deal with these aspects, the memories, the wounds in this story, until I design, because that book, I know if you do not remember, I'm ancient. If you don't remember that book that you used to get, like you can pick your own ending and pick your own story in the book, and you can flip through. If you want to see how the knight defeated the dragon, turn to page 52. If you want to see the knight got slain, turn to page 49. That's what you're doing. Everything that you're doing inside of your space is based on you deciding how the story works. The main key in you coming into gratitude is not being in this bias factor with ourselves. I was in a bias factor. So it was like, I would accept the good things that happened in my past, and I would harp onto those, and then I would try to rebuild those. But the negative things that happened in my life, I would tend to try to stray away from. So I wouldn't build off of those. I would try to keep those negatives over there in this corner over there. But that's where my inner child was. My inner child wasn't in the positive moments because I carried on the positive moments. My inner child was in the negative moments. My inner child was still in my inner child was still stuck in that womb where my mother said on countless occasions that you were an accident. My inner child was in the negative wounds, and when my pops was like, you're a cancer. Nigga, you Lucifer. I had to accept that. And I've talked about that in a previous lecture. I was like, the things that we do not accept that are based in the negative is because we don't understand what they mean. So something as simple as my pops calling me Lucifer when I was little, and me not understanding what Lucifer was, every time I was taking in new information about Saturn, rings, the morning star, all of these things, the light bearer, new information, I couldn't take that information in until I owned it. So I was called Lucifer back when I was like 14, 15 years old. And now I embrace it because I understand what it means. I rewrote that story. My mother said I was an accident. Until I asked my mother, why did you feel that way? And then the reason that she said it didn't have anything to do with me. I had to accept the answer. She was like, because you weren't supposed to happen, but I'm glad you happened. So like she was still trying to coach back and avoid it. But I had to accept that answer. I had to accept the answer that she gave me. Because until I accepted the answer, then I couldn't move forward because I would just keep reliving that answer. Oh, so you avoided, so I was an avoidance, I was an accident, so I guess everything I do for you is going to be an accident. So now I'm sitting there in that space trying to say, Everything that I did in that space throughout my life, in that dialogue, was always based on, so I'm not an accident now, am I? I'm not this now, am I? I'm not this now, am I? So I always had an antagonist. Remember, I've talked about an antagonist feeding. I was hoping and coping. I was hoping that she would feel some type of way. I was hoping that he would feel some type of way. But if they're avoiding, they got their own wounds, they got things they haven't dealt with, then of course, the natural narrative in resistance is that I'm going to be coping when they don't. Fine, you ain't got to accept it. Fine, fine, I don't care. I don't care. I do what I want. I do what I want. So I was always in that state, I do what I want. But it was always based on something. As you're coming into these aspects of affirming to your higher self, honoring your thoughts, and you're doing this internal work, you're removing the limitations of understanding those lessons. Why they did it. Why they did it is not as important in how they structured themselves. That's how you're going to learn your how. You have to accept everything that happened into your life because it shaped you where you're at now. You have to accept what happened in order for it to shape where you're at now. Because until then, you're only going to be practicing, unconsciously practicing. Because I remember practicing, it's easy to practice negative shit. It's easy. All you got to do is go back to a memory of something negative. But it's hard to accept and start having yourself in positive thoughts. It's hard to give yourself that positive conversation. It's hard to lead your conversation so you can be like, ooh, I learned some shit today. It's hard to set that tone. But once you set that tone, you got to keep going. Once you set that tone, it's time to keep going. I couldn't, as I always say, I couldn't sit here and speak on the things that I speak on and learn the lessons that I've, without embracing the lessons that I've learned from all aspects. I couldn't sit here. I couldn't sit here in the happiest that I've ever been. And for the happiest that I've ever been, the look on my face, and to be able to replicate that lesson into the space every time that I do something. I wouldn't be able to learn from, if a space is not giving me this, if a space is not returning this in a reciprocated fashion based on my design of acceptance, then it's time for me to step away from it. A lot of the stuff in your space, is it resembling wounds? A lot of the things that you keep around you, is it resembling wounds? Think about it like this. I thought about it like this. I'm always in the right position. You're always in the right position. What you do with this position is totally on you. You are the architect, you are the designer, you are the builder. You are the owner, you are the coach, you are the player. You are the brand, you are the platform, you are the corporation. It's all you. How are you taking this? How are you taking it? If it hurts your feelings, learn why it's hurting your feelings. Not just because I'm always angry, not because I was always angry. So everything that happened outside of me was just triggering, just showing me why I was always angry. See, that's why I don't do this, and that's why I don't do that, and that's why I didn't do this last week, and that's why I didn't do that today. So I spent more time hoping and coping, sitting there saying, that's why I don't do this, and that's why I don't do this, and that's why I can't do this. But then I was remembering those are the same conversations that I heard when I was little. Whenever my mom would sit there and say, that's why I don't do this and I don't do that. And then my pops would sit there and I was only reliving out their arguments. That wasn't even my story. I was reliving out other people's shadows. Wasn't even my shadows. So I wonder why I was confused when I started letting go. I wonder why I was confused when I started the healing process. I wondered, a lot of us are going to wonder why you're confused, why you go through confusion, why you going through the overwhelm, why you going through the reverting, why you going through all of these processes. I'm here to let you know that all of those things happen. That's the reason. They're to teach you. They're to help you learn. They're to help you stop coping and start learning. You have one decision that's split into two parts. You can choose to stay exactly where you are at, and you will receive everything You can receive everything that you want to get in that space, but you will never enjoy it. That's one thing that I had to learn, that I couldn't enjoy it because it was always backed up with, I had to keep feeding the antagonist. I had to keep feeding the struggle. So if I got something good in my life, something good happened in my life, then of course, because I'm not used to it, it's too good to be true mindset, I had to find struggle in something else. So if my relationship's going excellent, but I'm not used to my relationship going excellent, then guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to surround myself with things that are not going excellent to have something to bounce my relationship off of. If my job's not doing excellent, if my job's not going good, then of course I'm going to keep things around me to make it like, well, it could be worse, hoping and coping, instead of affirming and learning. Maybe it's time, maybe the reason that your job is not doing so well for you is because it was based on the older aspects of yourself, the comfort of yourself. Maybe it's time for you to up the ante, promote yourself. Maybe it's time to start spending that time when you're not there promoting yourself, changing out your space. Maybe that relationship, usually it's the relationship, we always say things don't work, but everything down here is to work for you. Everything down here works for you. You're the owner. You're the coach. You're the player. You're the owner. You're the coach. You're the player. So everything works for you. You just got to see where it needs to work for you. You upset because, you mad because, what? You don't love me enough. That's based on a reflection of the aspects of you. He doesn't give me the attention. She doesn't give me the attention. She doesn't trust me. He doesn't trust me. Doesn't believe in me. Do you believe in yourself first? Do you trust yourself first? It's time to stop hoping and coping that somebody's going to respect you more than you respect yourself. It's time to stop hoping and coping that somebody's going to provide more than you provide to yourself in a state of aspect of growth. It's time to start affirming and learning and honoring what you're learning in every space that you go into. If you desire more, you got to define that within inside of self first. Once I started defining those aspects inside of myself, I started seeing the honor in what came into my space. I was starting to become more gracious and more gratitude in what was coming into my space because I removed expectancy. Remove the anchor. This week's episode of the God Hour podcast, we got into those anchors or archons, those emotional attachments, those detrimental interests or coping mechanisms that did I say premature? The provisional chemistry, that means I'm only connected to it based on the interest of similar and afraid to get into that ground zero or go into that void. Tonight, let y'all know now, I'm going to put up the links later on. Papa_Lucy666 IG. New home for the God Hour show. Still same time, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're not following me on Instagram, Papa_Lucy666. Because it's going to be a very in-depth, we're going to get even deeper as we build out throughout the week. I desire you to be the best version of yourself. I desire you to remove those limitations. If you need that assistance and it resonates with you and you need that assistance, the only thing that's stopping you from reaching and stretching beyond your limitation is you saying, you know what? I do need this assistance. I don't understand. When I understood that I didn't understand and I still don't know everything, it opened me up to everything. It was only because you hold on to, I knew this and I knew that. Remember, when you're thinking, you're listening. What are you listening to? It's time to affirm and learn. Stop hoping and coping. I love you. You love us. Ashe.